Good evening, everybody. My name is Dawn Numdu. I'm the manager for audience and engagement at Food for Mzansi. And welcome to another Gather to Grow. I'm looking forward to an awesome evening. And tonight we're following the money. We're talking about the most profitable small farm ideas for 2022. Of course, I'm not alone. I have my co-host with me, Duncan Masiwa, who's the head of news at Food for Mzansi. Good evening, Duncan. Great to have you with me on Gather to Grow. I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion here tonight.
Hey, Dawn, it's great to be back. And of course, I don't know about you, but I'm really actually excited about tonight's session. And, looking at the topic that we are discussing today, who better than, some of Mzansi's leading agricultural economists, to help unpack tonight's topic. And of course, some of my favorite, Leona Archery, and as well as Elton Grieve, who's also joining us tonight. So I'm super excited. For those of you who are already tuned in, make sure that you share the link to tonight's discussion. If you know of future farmers who are looking to get into the industry, make sure that you share the link with them so that they can also participate in tonight's conversation. And of course, you can also pose questions as the night progresses. I'm super excited, Dawn.
So without any further ado, we have two of our speakers here. I think we do have some technical issues with our economist who's joining. Conse, I see, is on the space as a listener, but we'll definitely get them on board as we do our introductions. So first up is Leona Archery. Leona is the former Director General for Land Reform and Rural Development, and she's currently the CEO of the Agricultural Development Agency. Welcome to Gather to Grow, Leona. Great to have you with us.
Good evening to everybody on the call. Looking forward to a great conversation. I spent many years in development, a lot of them in government, more than 26 odd years in government, specifically focusing on land reform, rural development, and agriculture in the country. One of the key programs that I drove at the time, which is applicable still with the Agri-Parks program, which people are familiar with, and which we're still trying as private sector and government to actually begin to make it a sustainable program. Right now, I'm the CEO of the Agricultural Development Agency, which is really a private sector initiative that aims to bring together your commercial farmers, your established farmers in the country, together with new entrants into the agricultural space, and really through a partnership model to build sustainability within agriculture and to bring as many entrants and Black commercial farmers into the agricultural value chain. And obviously, the key areas we're focusing on as an agency is to support skills development, access to finance, and access to markets. And we do that in partnership with the members of AGDA.
Absolutely amazing, and so happy to have you on board. A world of experience, Leona. I'm looking forward to chatting with you tonight. And then we also have Elton Grieve, who's a friend of Food for Mzansi. His articles, some of his stories, and he's been featured with us a number of times. He is the Trade and Engagement Manager at Dredge. Elton, welcome back to Gather to Grow. Great to have you with us.
It's good to be back. It feels like my second home with you guys. It's good to be on the platform with Leona. Spent 20 years in government with her, wonderful mentor, and it's good to see you on Mzansi as well. Thanks to the team.
Thanks so much, Elton. As I mentioned, we do have our agricultural economist is also joining us tonight. If you're Googling small-scale agricultural business or farming ideas, you'll probably get a pop-up of 50 ideas, and deciding what will actually work for you would probably need a bit more in-depth research, especially when you're new to the sector. So my first question to our panelists tonight was, what should anyone really be exploring if they're considering it as a first-time option, if they know nothing about the sector, they're just considering it, they're just starting to, fall in love with it. What should they actually be looking at? Leona, could we start with you?
We're seeing a number of young people who are getting attracted into agriculture, which is just great. I think some of the key things that we are seeing that you would really have for is you may not necessarily have agricultural experience, but what is your passion? Which area of agriculture are you interested in or leaning towards? So some kind of farming knowledge without necessarily having detailed experience in agriculture would be something that you would start with. But also in the process of looking at the different types of businesses or agribusinesses that are out there, one needs to consider, do you have access to land wherever you are in the country at the moment? Which part of the country are you in at the moment? And what are some of the commodities that are actually, operating in your space at this time? Do you have equipment? What kind of funding would be required for you to set up your business? And I think obviously all of these elements being key in terms of how you develop a business plan that you would put together, because that business plan would help you to determine what you can and cannot do. And why I was saying it's very important to look at where would your passion lie? Is it with animals? Do you like to work with pigs or poultry or cattle? Do you like working with bees or vegetables? And which would be the easiest? Because not everything is easy in agriculture, most definitely. So which would be easy for you to get into, What time does it take for a particular commodity to get off the ground? And how much of time do you have? And how much do you have to invest, or how much can you gain access to? So I would think that those are some of the things that one would have to look at. Also, one of the key things that we need to consider is that agriculture need to be still considered as a business opportunity. So if you had some kind of business skill, that would be great. But if not, it's something that you can begin to learn and understand as you go forward as well.
Thank you so much, Leona. I think that's definitely something we've heard many experts say. Operate your farm like it's a business. And that's really, really important. I think you've made mention of a few areas and things to consider when you're getting started. And just on our conversations that we've had over the past few weeks on Gather to Grow, even starting a farm with no money, it makes me think about what are the options for people who live in urban areas. So there's urban agriculture, there's livestock feed manufacturing, there's even an option to operate a nursery if that's what you're into or what you're interested in. Alton, maybe you can help to sort of give us a breakdown of the sector and how many opportunities really lies within it.
The importance lies in that, quite often we assume that small-scale farmers can't be profitable or can't make a good impression on the market, which is, for me, is far from reality. Small-scale farmers have got massive opportunities out there. Quite often small-scale farmers operate in silos. What are other small-scale farmers doing in the area? How can you come together and form a form of a cooperative and increase your bargaining power? So the market that you're serving, the commodity that you are producing, what is it going to bring you in terms of returns? I always talk about small-scale farmers or farmers in general should look at whatever they produce as an investment, and that investment must bring you a return. I know that currently in South Africa, there's a large move towards the fruit sector, a lot of demands on fruit, but that's not the only one, the grains, the livestock. It all depends on the area you're in, the scope that you have, the resources that you have at hand. What can your farm do? What can you do with your resources, and what's going to give you the best return on investment? And I think quite often we just see small-scale farmers as food producers, but we should shift the attention to small business enterprises and how do we develop those small enterprises throughout the value chain.
Thank you so much, Alton. Definitely, I think, it's important what you just highlighted, that it's important, for farmers or new farmers that enter the space to look at agriculture as an investment. And in fact, that investment should bring them a return. My next question, when thinking about profitability, is it different for a small producer to a, what we call a mega farmer? And at what point can you actually realistically start turning a profit? Maybe, Leona, you could answer that question first.
I think one of the differences between the mega farmer at the moment and the smaller farmers is the efficiencies of scale, obviously, that your mega farmer is getting. So even in terms of how they can access inputs on the market themselves that they make sure, they have got before they actually begin to engage in a particular commodity. And so from the small scale side, in terms of profitability, obviously the whole issue around higher input costs, their access to credit and their access to markets becomes some of the areas that they would have to consider as they get into any kind of farming venture. If smaller farmers begin to aggregate, begin to come together, that's where they begin to see the efficiencies in terms of scale and begin to lower their costs, which then obviously increases their profitability and increases their ability to better profit margins earlier. So instead of paying a large amount of money or higher cost for inputs, whether it's feed or whatever it is that you're requiring, if you are coming together with other farmers within your space and able then to get what is needed for your farming enterprise at a bigger scale, you're obviously spending less in terms of what you're putting out. Obviously, again, the commodity that people get into is very important. Your return on investment for different commodities would take different times. A big move at the moment for people to get into the fruit industry. But in some of those, the waiting time in terms of your ROI is a bit longer. But again, once you get to that break-even point, it is really a very sustainable income generation process. In the vegetable production space, obviously, your times are quicker and you can already start getting a break-even point much earlier. But again, it depends at the scale at which you're moving into it and whether or not made sure you have a market, because that becomes key to how you're going to calculate your profitability margins as well.
Thank you, Leona, for that. And I definitely agree with, we've seen higher input costs really squeezing our farmers, and we can just imagine the impact it has on our smallholder producers in the country. And what you point out, the idea of smaller farmers actually coming together, to ensure that they actually see better profit margins, that's quite important. It's something in our Gather to Grow spaces that we hear our speakers and those that listen in actually champion a lot for people to group together and start what we call co-ops to, of course, ensure, better profit margins. I'd like to, go to the next question. Alton, you can jump in on this one. One of the important aspects, and definitely point that many experts emphasize here on your Gather to Grow. If you're producing on a small scale, it's actually advisable to, to find a niche or an in-demand product or a market that actually works for you. I think, Dawn, you'll agree with me here. Our speakers here on Gather to Grow often talk about being innovative and being adaptable and progressive in your thinking. What are some of the options, in terms of current commodities that new farmers can explore? There's, of course, beekeeping and honey production or piggery and poultry. What are your thoughts on this, Alton?
It's an interesting question because the small-scale farmer or family farming concept is a worldwide concept. In Brazil, Vietnam, Thailand, from the Tridge perspective, we're importing from small-scale farmers. They come together as a group and supply export quality fruit. So it comes down to area-based planning. If you're in an area that can produce fruit, strawberries, blueberries, whatever fruit there is that is affordable to do, that is a kind of niche market you can go into. Beekeeping is becoming a niche market, especially with requirement for genuine organic South African honey. It comes down again to doing market research, engaging people in your area, studying the area, what is being produced, what is not in the area, because quite often we go into an area and it becomes livestock or cropping or that kind of thing, and we don't realize that we could actually go into a niche market. I know that there's a big move now in the strawberry industry, massive demand for strawberries in South Africa, and many areas in South Africa can produce strawberries, and it technically is not a very difficult or very expensive product to produce, but it does require attention. We are seeing massive demands from the Middle East and Far East for South African strawberries. That can be done on a sideline to what your major producing element is. So again, one of the first things that we need to move away from is the mindset that I'm a small-scale farmer and I cannot do it. A small-scale farmer can be just as effective as a commercial farmer. It's just economies of scale. The main focus is to do research. Speak to people that are in the sector, speak to people that are in the export or even in the local market. What is the current trend? What is available to do? What can be done? Because remember, you need to know your farm. Is your water suitable? What is your logistics like? Do you have access to markets? It's no use doing a product and you don't have access to markets, road infrastructure, etc. It comes down to, even before you start farming, what can your farm do? What does the local economy look like? What does the area-based economy look like? And start doing that research and looking at what you can do. Attach yourself to study groups, attach yourselves to people that might be doing these commodities, because remember that as a small-scale farmer, you could actually be supplying to a commercial who is maybe big-scale and exporting, and start off from there, learn from there, and build your systems up from there. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you have to have direct access to a market, but it's tapping into existing structures and niche markets, taking it from there.
Very important point there, Alton, about the economies of scale. Think about what you can do that can contribute to the bigger picture, and also more specifically about what role you play in the broader agricultural sector. And just on that point, I mean, if you're looking to start a beekeeping business or start with strawberries, for example, weekly on Food from Zanzi, we try to give, especially the new farmers entering the sector, that how-to guide about how to get started. And it is very vital that you kind of get the small things right from the beginning. And it often means speaking to someone that's in the industry that you can find as a mentor, or reading the article, or going to the video, or even just doing all the vital research that's super important when you're starting out in the sector. Now, in preparing for this session specifically tonight, then Leona, I'd maybe like to bring you into the conversation, is that macadamia nuts are hard to beat when it comes to being considered as a lucrative crop in terms of the per land area used in South Africa. Our economist just came on board. Maybe talk a little bit about statistics. And according to the South African Macadamia Growers Association, there was an average export price of macadamia kernels in 2017 was 224 rand. What is the latest statistic, and how viable is it really for small-scale producers? Conse, welcome to Gather to Grow. Happy to have you here.
We haven't had much of an update in terms of the macadamia production, but the macadamia producers in South Africa, we are in the top 3 producing countries. And with export prices, there's really been a move in terms of consumption and demand, especially from our European consumers as well as the US. So South Africa really is a large player in that space, especially for exports. But when we're talking small farmer, in order for you to start making that money, there's a lot of investment initially. Then there's years before the trees actually start to be in full production. There's a lot of investment in terms of finding the right trees, finding the right variety for your conditions. And also it's an economies of scale type of market. So when we're really looking at small farming ideas, I wouldn't say that it's not viable, but it's definitely going to take a lot of years before you start to see the fruits of your labor. So if you're going into that market, you need to have a bit of capital to start with, and you definitely have to have patience, because like I said, you start seeing only your full production around year 6, year 7. So for someone who's just starting, it might be a challenge. But it is definitely a lucrative market. Macadamias are doing very well. In fact, all the tree nuts are a growing industry, very high demand, and it's just been growing, and the demand doesn't seem that it's going to ease. Pecan nuts is also another crop that is doing very well. So the pecan nuts and the macadamias are the top tier of crops that we are exporting in South Africa. But in terms of the small market, someone spoke about strawberries. We need to start farming things that are more of a niche market, more in demand. Things like herb gardening is very big in that space. You could really just be planting on a small space, planting different varieties, things like your basil, things like your oregano, your cilantros. There's a whole niche market going into candle making, going into scents, aromatherapy essences, also going into your teas, going into restaurants. It's crops that are easily perishable. So if you're closer to your market, you as a producer can actually tap into your local retailer, your local consumer, your local restaurant market without having that distorted quality from finding products from a big commercial farmer who is kilos and kilos away from that market.
Thank you so much, Kansai. Great to have you here, and sorry that it took so long for you to get in because of technical aspects. To everyone else on the space, Kansai Moraba is an agricultural economist and also a strategy and operations analyst at one of South Africa's leading agrochemical companies. Thank you, Kansai. Leona, do you have a point to share on that specific question around macadamia nut and nuts and production around that?
I also don't have necessarily the update figures, but I fully agree with Kansai. I mean, obviously, we're all aware that South Africa is in the top countries as far as macadamia exports is concerned. It is a commodity that requires more than R1 million a hectare in terms of establishment at the moment. But it's not something that you cannot get into, but start somewhere smaller, I would agree, and then move into, something like macadamias. But again, if you have land and commercial partners that are in your space or in your area, there are creative and innovative ways of entering into joint venture partnerships with people who are already established in the macadamia industry as well as the pecan nut industry. I know in AGDA, for example, we have a number of commercial partners sitting in the Northern Cape, sitting in KwaZulu-Natal, who have been engaging and looking to engage with communal area farmers as well as farmers who have access to land but don't have the necessary financial ability, to get those lands under macadamia farming. So there are those opportunities that exist to get involved in that. In the same breath, I think that, beside macadamias, again, there is ways of using or aggregating smallholder farmers, even in the fruit production side, and getting them into sort of a critical mass that allows them to access the right market. And then just one last comment, I think, on the herb market, and the other niche commodities. I mean, even in vegetables, if one thinks about just planting the normal things like spinach or cabbage, yes, that begins to bring you in income in a short space of time. But the herbs themselves are very highly profitable, not difficult to grow, can be grown in small spaces. But again, in the packaging, of your bigger retailers, etc., your McCain's and all of those areas, there's a bit of vegetables that sit in some of your stir fries, etc., that have not been fully exploited by our South African growers at the moment and are currently being imported into the country. So how do we tap into that space? And that's where the issue of market research, understanding the environment that you want to get into is very, very important, because there are those opportunities as well.
Definitely. And I think a few weeks ago, we spoke specifically about these trends or niche crops that could be explored. But you're making a very valid point. Sometimes we don't even think about the options available. I see Ivor Price, Food for Mzansi co-founder, is also here. Ivor, you'd like to ask a question or comment on our topic tonight?
Good evening, Dawn. Good evening, panelists, and all the people tuning into the spaces. I found tonight's discussion really meaningful, and I really loved what some of the panelists have saying, particularly Alton's point about how small-scale farmers can partner with commercial-scale farmers to fast-track their growth. That was quite fascinating to me. There seems to be many opportunities for partnerships, and I was wondering if the panelists could perhaps explore on some of the opportunities that they are aware of in that space.
Thanks so much, Ivor. Anyone keen to take that one? Alton, maybe a comment from you?
There's a lot of opportunities, and again, it comes down to the area that you're in. From my perspective, we look at export opportunities, and from my experience over the last 2 years, your biggest opportunities lie in what I would call cash crops, and especially in the fruit sector, vegetable sector. To give you an example, I had a small-scale farmer up in Limpopo that was doing chilies and just couldn't market their chilies. We managed to do an assessment, found out it was export quality. He's got 2 hectares. He's currently exporting his chilies to Vietnam. So you got to find that niche market where you've done your research. The reason why I mentioned strawberries is that there is such a big demand for strawberries that we're currently in the process of importing strawberries from Egypt to sustain the South African market. Yet we have enough small-scale farmers with the resources to farm strawberries. I mean, some of us have strawberries in our gardens. It's just upping the scale. So small-scale farmers mustn't limit themselves to what they think is the general commodity, either poultry, livestock. Not that I'm saying that's not good, but look at what can bring you in cash reserves, quick turnaround times, link you to an exporter or to a marketeer. So the opportunities are there. It's just for you to link up with people. If you start off small, you don't have to start off big. 1 hectare of strawberries, you might sell it to a commercial farmer or sell it to checkers or something like that. It's drawing the linkages, understanding the product that you're producing and the quality that's required. Another example, we have a lot of farmers in the Eastern Cape. I spoke to some of them yesterday that have 2 or 3 hectares of good quality citrus, but you have 20 small-scale farmers competing on their own. We've brought them together. Now you have these farms producing enough tonnage for export and we can buy from them. So it's drawing linkages amongst each other with commercial farmers, with market role players, and finding out what is best suited for you to do on your farm and taking it from there.
Thanks so much, Alton.
Just from my experience, I've seen that certain banks would have a collaboration between their business enablement environment where they would take a primary producer and link them with a secondary producer. So somebody who's a bit more high up in the value chain in processing. As a small producer, you need to look at maybe, going to your bank and seeing that, okay, I have something that is perhaps a niche. Maybe it's strawberries, like Alton is saying, and then you get linked up with a company maybe producing strawberry jam, because those companies are always looking up, especially for BEE scoring, to also uplift the communities and give back and also tap into that small market and not just use commercial. The struggle for small producers to sometimes get into the market due to volumes. So if they in with a secondary producer who is already in the market, then they can reach those volumes that is required by the retailers. So you have those gatherings where people can actually help you as a small farmer, even in the financial sector, that I have seen in my space in the financial sector in my past. So that is also something worth looking at.
Thank you so much, Kansai. Definitely another perspective there in terms of finding the right partners and also ways to navigate and do it. Leona, just your last comment around partnerships and also smaller farmers working with commercial farmers. What has your experience been, especially with the Agricultural Development Agency?
No, absolutely. And I think, both Alton and Kansai making some very good points around how partnerships actually enrich the value chain. That is one of the key principles of AGDA, that we bring together established commercial farmers with new entrants into agriculture. And we're definitely beginning to see some good fruit coming out of that, for lack of a pun, on the fruit part. We're putting together a very big blueberry transaction at the moment. And the only way that transaction was enabled because we were bringing in new entrants with current established commercial partners in the sector. And what it does also is, besides bringing in, the experience and the expertise, it de-risks some of these transactions. So it becomes easier to access additional markets that you are looking for. So we're definitely seeing that. The partnerships also between private sector and government working together to actually empower the new entrants and small scale. One of the areas we're working in is in the poultry value chain in Gauteng. And some of the things we're doing is beginning to aggregate, for example, simple things like your egg supply, but linking them with other partners that sit in the network of AGDA in the food services business, for example. So those who are supplying into the hotel industry, your hospitality, besides all of the other mining sectors, etc. So they accessing then from our small producers at the moment. So those are just some of the opportunities, that are beginning to unfold. But definitely on the vegetable production side, we're seeing, like Alton is saying, that's really, for me, a sort of a quick win opportunity. And there's two things that it does, especially with the smaller producer, where it deals with, even in the urban agriculture space, it deals with the household food security, but aggregated, that supply then matched with a commercial farmer begins to create sufficient quantity that allows you to access many of your retailers and even get your product into the market floor if you need to do that. So those are some of the projects that we are working on at the moment. And citrus industry also definitely one of those areas that we're looking at. In Limpopo, really collaboration across the vegetable value chain, the potato value chain between commercial farmers and small-scale farmers is what is bringing that product into market for the small-scale guys. But one of the things I just want to pick up on what Kansai is saying, even as we talk about profitable small farm ideas, is all of the other opportunities that exist enables, a producer to produce. And for me, there is a lot of opportunity for new entrants to get involved, like you were talking about, besides the fertilizer, but looking at the value addition around packaging or just chopping and dicing vegetables increases the value that you can get in the marketplace for that product. So those are other things that we need to start thinking about in terms of how we package a product to market. And that creates new opportunities as well.
Dawn, I'm absolutely loving tonight's topic and the thoughts that are coming from our speakers tonight. I think what's clear for me is that, agriculture is growing. It remains a vibrant sector with so many great opportunities, for small scale farmers to actually, tap into. Conce was talking about, it's important for smallholder farmers to actually start thinking about those niche markets. That, of course, is very important. And, for those listeners that are tuned in, we, of course, have an article that we published earlier this year, on the niche markets, that you can try out for 2022. So if you're looking to see what's out there, what the options are for you, you can definitely jump onto Food from Mzansi to look at what the options are for you. I want to go to Alton quickly. Alton, you were talking about it's important for smallholder farmers to, start thinking kind of differently. How do small-scale producers start thinking about the entire value chain? I think Leona was also touching on that in her previous comment that she was making. How do they start thinking about the entire value chain and not just limiting themselves to, farming or the day-to-day running of a small farm?
I don't really like the term small scale farmer because the only thing small is your ability and your mindset. You can push yourself to limits. So I think the first step for me, even before you look at value chain, is to say, what do I want to do and what can I do and how much am I going to put into doing it? A small scale farmer is just as big as a commercial farmer. It's about making money, and you can make money. In terms of the value chain, there are a lot of opportunities. In your commodity that you're going into, you're looking at, for example, fruit. You're looking at fresh fruit, dried fruit, frozen fruit. You're looking at the logistics element of it. What is your input and where can you actually find opportunities in there? Because sometimes farmers, whether commercial or small, think that business ends when the product leaves their farm gate. You've got to look at what are the opportunities in the processing element of it. There's a big move towards frozen fruit, frozen strawberries, dried fruit. So you've got to go and see where you want to tap into that market. And quite often, farmers in general get a farm gate price, and that's it. Yet their product goes into so many different more elements. It's the export, local market, frozen market, dried fruit market, your oriental market. So it's all within your limits. It's how you want to see your scope. And for me, it's important for small scale farmers in general, when they do their production planning, is to see how far they can push themselves in the value chain. And the opportunities in the value chain are there. It's just not being exploited. And again, I come back to it in the collective bargaining. If you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 small scale farmers producing the same commodity, coming together as a cooperative or some formal structure, they have bargaining power within the value chain. And I think that's where we need to take a shift away from just farming and talk about business persons. A farmer is a business person. It's about making money. How do I make money and where do I make more money? I think the opportunities are there. It is just for small-scale farmers and farmers to put themselves in a position to exploit opportunities in the value chain. If you look at the current situation in the fruit industry, we are battling to source fruit. We are battling with logistics. We're battling with freighting. So there's enough space to come into that element and bring up solutions in terms of that. So we tend to depend too much on the commercial infrastructure, yet as organized agriculture, we can bring in commercial, small scale, medium scale, or farmers to participate in the value chain.
Thank you so much, Elton. I love that. How do I make money? Where do I make money? And how do I make more money? It's definitely something to think about when you select partners, how you collectively create your strategies to grow in the industry. Conte, would you like to add something?
Just to add to what Elton was saying, I recently visited a strawberry farm, and there's a different value add that we never really thought about. Agriculture is so linked to tourism industry. You cannot go and enjoy a place without having some food or enjoying just the scenery. And with fruits, there's now this new growth in a you-picking phenomena to it. You have a small strawberry farm. I mean, it's organic, it's fresh. Already you're tapping into a market that is willing to pay more just for that extra taste and that extra, our consumers are now moving more to health consciousness behavior. So you're already having a customer that is not too price sensitive, wanting to consume your product. But on top of that, you get the picking experience from either picking blueberries or you're picking strawberries, which is now adding an experience. So you're not only just providing a product to the consumer, you're also providing an experience and a service to them. On top of that, the consumer is posting the pictures picking strawberries, but making it fashion. That already is just free advertising and marketing for you. We need to start thinking of not just also producing the actual crops, but investing in the value add and selling them either in a restaurant format or making nice homegrown foods that we can sell at farmers markets. That's where my thinking is at. And that I believe is also an untapped market. I mean, thinking COVID and not being able to travel, South African farms can now become also hotspots for tourists.
Definitely. I think agri-tourism is definitely one of the aspects that we aren't exploring enough. Obviously, COVID-19 had an impact on it, but there's this new life where people want to be out. They want to have these experiences now that we are able to move around more freely. Our speaker, Tabile Nkonjana from the National Agricultural Marketing Council is here. Tabile, great to have you with us. Welcome to Gather to Grow. I know that you've been listening in. Welcome.
Hi, John and everyone. I'm listening to the colleagues. They are breaking down like some good points. But I think let's just continue with the whole podcast. Then I will just raise my hand if I need to add something that I think is going to be relevant, because I don't know what has been covered so far. And I'm truly sorry for that.
Not to worry. We're very happy to have a representative from the National Agricultural Marketing Council here with us on Gather to Grow. Shana, you've been waiting to take the floor. Farming with Shana, another dynamic farmer in Mzansi's agri sector. You can ask a question to our speakers. You're welcome.
It's a very great introduction. Quite a lot of questions that I have. Just to introduce myself, yes, I'm a farmer, and I'll just start with my own problems that I experienced trying, I don't want to say smart farming, but finding a niche. So I did find my niche, I did my research, everything was well executed. I found that the herbs are in high demand, especially in Johannesburg. Herbs like the microgreens, your flat leaf parsley. And then I went with two, which was wild rocket and also baby spinach. But the logistic, the labor that is involved with it, the processing was just too much. The way that we crashed, we had to relocate back to KZN. I hear what Elton Grieve is talking about in terms of the strawberries and everything, and also exploring because about the bargaining power, working together. I don't know how you've been doing it, and I would like to engage you further even after this. You just pick your brain about a few other things. But in terms of you assisting farmers, do you also assist them with things like compliances? Because if you're going to find them in markets, I'm sure things like compliance, like let's say SA Global Gap, you need to be compliant with them, food safety compliances. That would be my question for you. And also, what are your thoughts about the avocado industry currently? I see a lot of KZN farmers, especially in the Midlands, planting thousands of hectares of avocado, and there's a new avocado in the Eastern Cape. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about it. So I see like a drive, people moving from producing citrus here in KZN to avocados. And the trend when it's also macadamia down in the South Coast, they're moving from sugarcane and also banana production, and they're moving towards macadamia production. And in terms of macadamia production, there are new varieties like the A4s, which start putting at year 3. Year 4, year 5, you've already made back all your money. So what are your thoughts, especially also on that? And then I want to also ask questions to the CEO of ACTA. I see you guys are doing great things. I just want to ask something in terms of assisting small farmers. Do you also help them with things like credit, access to finance, mechanization, logistics, infrastructure? And also, the problem with especially small farmers or emerging farmers is the maintenance. You can plant, you can establish a hectare of anything, but then the maintenance plan, do you guys offer such services? After let's do partner and then I plant maybe 3 hectares of blueberries, do you have like a plan there at ACTA that you guys follow up and then you come? And then also, if you are going to partner me with a very well-known farmer or commercial farmer, will I be able to use some of their equipments, because we battle a lot with things like tractors, boom sprayers, and so forth and so on. So that would be my 2 cents about this and also my questions.
Listen, Farming with Shana came with a file of questions. Thank you so much for participating. Leona, but do you maybe want to take his question with regards to the opportunities that are there for him with ACTA? And I think maybe Tabile, you can take the question about, the boom in the avocado industry. Leona, you can go first.
Yes, we are set up as AGDA to support new entrants with access to finance, access to skills, as well as access to markets. So depending on the type and nature of the commodity you're working in, which part of the country you are in, etc., and the enterprise you're looking at, the scale of your enterprise as well, we would work with you to try and help you package a sort of a feasible business plan, a bankable business plan, and then work in terms of facilitating access to different types of finance that are suited to that particular business, but then also makes it, very sustainable in the long term. The reason that we link our new entrants and we work a lot with the partnership model, specifically because of what you're saying. The new entrants sometimes would have access to land. You definitely have the passion to do the commodity you want to do, but there's certain areas that are missing. And obviously it depends on a project by project basis, what is required to make that partnership work. So we can definitely have a conversation offline as well and see what and how we could provide assistance to yourself. AGDA has partners across the country. Our membership ranges, from your commercial banking sector to your commercial farmers across the different commodities, and also includes the various commodity organizations. So part of some of the things that we do would definitely be the ongoing kind of support that farmers would require. And we do that through the network that we have. So definitely look forward to having a chat with you after this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leona. Farming with Sean, I hope that answers your question. And of course, you can connect with Leona after the session. Tabile, do you maybe want to take the question that he had about, the boom in the avocado industry? Seems like a lot of farmers are, sort of making a shift to that industry.
Avocados just became like a blue chip of recent times. Even in South Africa, the trend is actually not necessarily in South Africa alone. Even a couple of countries in Africa, Tanzania, for example, they are getting a lot of shift from other typically produce into avocado. There's a lot of demand around it, not necessarily domestically, globally. There's just a lot that the world is needing avocados for. There's innovation around it, and also the issues with the health-related issues that comes with it. People are buying a lot of it. And unfortunately, for some countries that used to be like bigger in terms of producing it, now there have been some recent clashes with that. The flies or like some sort of outbreak within, which is actually one of the issues that we're talking about in South Africa. We've seen like there's been a bit of an issue. A lot of people need avocado globally, and some countries are having issues to control, or at least to have some pesticides that are used to control that, which is one thing that South Africa, I think, soon might be experiencing as well, because we're having issues or some debates around the regulations of getting the right pesticides. And also in South Africa, as much as it needs a relatively amount of time as well as input into it in terms of investing in it, it is something that one can go for, and it is worth that risk, because I feel like it's going to be a while until the world has enough of that. And South Africa is actually one of the biggest in terms of supplying the global market, and the demand within the markets that we normally export to. It has been growing over some time, as much as there's been some changes just because of some technical changes with market, or like some ports or logistic issues. Emerging farmers, that they just need to get into contact with the right folks, at least people that are already within that space, be it the trader or someone who's a bigger producer, because sales are very important to this, as has been highlighted a couple of times. It is a very, very good option for one to go for, just to get to the right folks, talk to the relevant people. But there's absolutely a market for it.
Thank you so much, Tabile, highlighting important aspects there. So avocados is definitely a thing to get into. We want to chat to Kansai a little bit about diversification. I think what Shana was also talking about is people sort of changing from one commodity over to the next, depending on how in demand it is. How important is it for new entrants into agriculture to think about diversifying from day one and not limiting themselves to one specific commodity? And also, how much time do you actually spend or give to a specific commodity? And then as we start wrapping up the conversation, I maybe want to talk about some of the challenges or some of the threats that might come with starting a small farm. And then I have one last question for all of our speakers as well.
Diversification is very important, especially, like you said, we are dealing with small producers. So should there be an adverse situation, you do not want to find yourself with all your eggs in one basket. Like I was mentioning before, as a small producer, you could be planting and playing in the space of herb gardening. But that is not just limited to herb gardening. You could be actually planting vegetables on the side and in between planting other herbs to keep away things like pests. So you always have maybe your green peppers or your tomatoes on the one side, and on the other side you have these microgreens or these herbs that you are also selling, which means you also have a diverse market that you can get into. You are knocking basically on many doors. For me, I believe it's something that you already start thinking the minute you get into business, because you need to be strategic when you get into farming. You don't just go by the day and just hope for the best. You must really think about it as a business with all the strengths, the weaknesses, and the opportunities and the threats that you can possibly identify in your farming operation. Even if you were to do poultry, right? Because we did say that it's a viable option, especially in the small space. You don't necessarily have to be a big player trying to compete with the rainbows, but small-scale poultry farmers can do very well. Their market is organic. Those chickens are not pumped with a lot of antibiotics, so they are more organic. So it means that the eggs will also be very nice, and they can get a premium for that. So instead of just selling the chicken, you could also be selling the eggs. So always think like that on how you can tap into the different segments in the value chain when you're starting a business, and not just look at it that, okay, I'm just going to do one crop. Even if you are planting maize, I mean, most maize farmers, always do crop rotation. Sometimes not even just about diversifying for more profit. It's also about diversifying to make sure that your crop is also sustainable. Your soil moisture is sustainable over the long term. So you're always thinking about reinvesting in your business. And that's basically my take on that. And just to add to Tabile's avocado comment, there's a high demand. Avocado is one of the superfoods in the industry. So that's why you see so many trees popping up, farming with Shana in your region. And in terms of just the issues that you are saying about the fertilizer users or the pesticides users, we are exporting a lot of our avocados to the European countries, and they are very stringent on, our MRLs, which is basically the chemical residues, with our consumers being more attentive to what they're consuming and how their food is being consumed. The biological controls of how we produce and how we grow our produce is becoming a very big topic now, and it's going to be a trending topic in agriculture moving forward. So avocados are a superfood, very healthy and very beneficial towards your health, and that's why you see the growth that you see in avocado, basically the same as the fruit and the tree nuts. Sorry, I deviated, but I hope I did cover the why we need to diversify question.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Kanse. Tabile, would you like to add something?
I think Conseil just mentioned one thing that is very important about the regulations. As I was saying earlier, that there was a meeting earlier around the regulations of the chemicals that are being used and stuff. Yes, is saying something that's very correct, that in South Africa now there's going to be that debate because of the the regulations that are being implemented, or at least being proposed. As you are saying, our products in South Africa, they tend to go to Europe, which is one of the reasons actually we have issues with the livestock production. It's mainly because of the hygiene processes that are being used and stuff. So I think what she's saying is very correct. And also the issue about the diversification, as much as it is a good advice that one would give, but I think for emerging or small scale producers, it tends to be not to be necessarily a good idea for a couple of reasons. For an example, in Western Cape, one thing that we realized, especially during the COVID-19 period, when there was like those rampant sort of lockdowns and stuff, people that were diversifying, or at least the farmers that were more into the diversification, were the ones that were already like larger in their operations, especially the vineyards, because their concerns were around the issue of the wine that they produce, and then now they wanted something that was going to be able to sort of cushion them should that route of producing grapes for wine not materializes. So it's normally an option that I think it would be much better for like the larger commercialized farmers, because for small scale producers, for example, you have 1 hectare. As much as that can be a good option, but sometimes it wouldn't necessarily viable, especially if you are to bring the issue of economies of scales. As Elton mentioned earlier, that for such farmers, it tends to be an issue to meet the sizes or the quantities that are being asked for. So for small scale farmers, it is a good idea, but it is not necessarily one thing that personally I would advise.
Thanks so much, Tabile. As we close tonight's discussion, and I'm sure we can talk about this all night, but what are some of the challenges? I think one last point that Shana was mentioning was around compliance. We have had some discussions in our Farmers Inside Track podcast, specific for farmers in the country, around global gap certification and everything that comes with that, especially when you're looking at exporting your produce. Leona, what are some of the threats or challenges that you've seen with new farmers or beginner farmers within agriculture in South Africa that you can maybe highlight?
If you're going back to the question also around the issues around compliance and meeting the demands, not just in terms of compliance around global gap, but also what the retailers here in South Africa are looking for. And that's where many of the new entrants into agriculture, especially those farming at a smaller scale, tend not to meet those requirements. And I think some of the things that we are trying to do is find a way to bring them up to a point where they're able to produce the right quality, the right quantity, and consistency of supply is so important. And I think, we've all been speaking about it tonight around how an aggregator model for smaller farmers begins to help them to get the right quantity that can go into the market system. But that quality aspect, consistency of supply, is extremely important. And it's definitely a challenge that they face. So there's ways to address that, besides the training, but also working within the current regulatory environment and with partners that are able to assist you with the right technical expertise and advice and guidance in that regard is very, very important. And obviously there are a number of other challenges that you're right, we can go on, but around the financing, etc., that's very important. But I think the important thing when you're starting up, please look at agriculture as a business. Have a correct plan which begins to look at all the elements that could come up in order to ensure that you actually build a sustainable business from the ground up.
Thanks so much, Leona. Alton, would you maybe like to just respond to that question around challenges or threats you're aware of, especially with the farmers that you work with in South Africa? Comment from your side, and then I'll ask my last question to all of our speakers here tonight.
One of the biggest threats is small-scale farmers underestimating their abilities. I think that tag of being a small-scale farmer puts people in a bracket which makes them feel inferior, yet they have the power to be players within the agricultural sector. So the focus should be on a mindset shift and really focus on what can be done and how best to do it. There are opportunities out there. It's just for farmers to focus on doing good quality produce. If you've got good quality produce, the market will snap it up. Draw linkages to the markets. In my experience, especially from an export perspective, there are many small-scale farmers out there, emerging farmers, that have export quality, but they just don't have the means to get it to market. And one of the aspects that we are dealing with is assisting small-scale farmers. We export to the Middle East a lot. We assist farmers with gap, getting their fruit graded, assisting them in get to that, because in the end, we need supply. Earlier, there was a discussion about avocados. I'm currently trying to source 10 containers of avocado for Greece. Yes, it's still early in the season, but supply is already snapped up. So there is a huge demand for it. The risk is when farmers try to do too much and lose focus on quality. We try 3-4 commodities on the same piece of land, and none of it is really of export or market quality. So focus on what you can do well and get it into the market. So that's one of the big risks. Just earlier, we spoke about opportunities. I know for a fact that there's a big shift in terms of kiwi fruit in South Africa, big opportunities there. South Africa, strange enough, they've just launched the Dragon Fruit Association. There's big opportunities in the dragon fruit industry. But let's not lose focus on the fact that, from my perspective, there is huge demand for South African produce. I see it on a daily basis from the Middle East, the Far East, and we just can't keep up with products. So on what is there, what you can do, and do it to your best abilities, you will get it into the market, you will make money.
Thank you so much, Dragon Fruit. I love it. I haven't thought about that. Kiwis I know of, but definitely a player in the game, I think, in terms of those niche crops that we should be looking at. As we wrap up, I'd like to ask our speakers one last question. In terms of if you had $1 million, where would you specifically invest for maximum return? So to everyone who's listening, if they had to consider one thing, what would that be? Leona, we started with you. Would you maybe like to take the floor first, and then I'll give the spot to all of our other speakers as well?
The current market is really leading towards the fruit industry at the moment. So obviously, with $1 million, can't really get into your longer term crops like your macadamias and your citrus and all of that. But I think you could definitely start with strawberries and some of those niche commodities he's talking about. And depending on the size of land I had, I would definitely diversify that with some specialized crops like turmeric or ginger, something in that area. Because I can see the market, especially around the health benefits, has grown quite significantly in that area. I hope that helps, and hope it makes me a millionaire soon.
Definitely something we have spoken about on Food for Mzansi, turmeric and ginger production, definitely something to go into as well. Kanse, Tabile, between the two of you, I think you can decide, just unmute your mic and go for it.
The world is moving more and more to plant-based diet. As much as, it's not as, taken up already in South Africa to a large extent, but there's a move, and this move is coming, and it's coming very strong. So for me, definitely some vegetable farming. The more niche, the better, because you're not giving me $1 million, only R1 million. So definitely I'll be doing that. And on the side, definitely my agri-tourism. So I'll be cooking up some nice meals and giving you an experience.
That sounds awesome. I'm all for the experience. Tabile, would you like to go next?
One thing that I've been following a lot, it is poultry. Poultry has a lot of potential, not necessarily in South Africa, even globally. Look, we've been seeing some great policies. Well, they're not necessarily great, but they are shaping the conventional way of doing agriculture. For example, I've been following something in the US about free antibiotic poultry. The amount of the change that is happening there, is ridiculous. For example, here in South Africa, we import around 500,000 of poultry every year, and we are currently having issues around that. So I think for me, I would definitely go for that, because I'm seeing a lot of loopholes. I mean, if we are going for something that people are calling for, and you are to meet the global standards, then I think that for me, it is one thing that I would definitely go for. As much as there are some other niche markets like your garlic, for example, some mushroom, but of course, those are other things that one will consider. But for me, it will definitely be poultry for now. It's something that I'm seeing a lot of changes there, and also global policies are forcing some changes. Like, for example, last year, EU has banned beef from Brazil because of some regulation issues. So there's a lot of shifts within the livestock space, and there's a lot of opportunities. Just one need to get his story right, and if you produce a good product, as what it was correct mentioned, you're gonna definitely get a good market. And there's a lot changing within the agricultural space globally, and it is definitely coming into South Africa. And I think one can be able to make a lot of money within the poultry industry. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Tabile. Elton, the floor is yours for your last comment.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. If I was given R1 million, I would go into tunnel farming. I know I've been hopping on strawberries, but it's a cash crop in the fruit industry. I'd put up as many as I can, focusing on strawberries, blueberries, cherry tomatoes. Simple but yet good quality fruit that can get me returns. I would join up with the current exporter. I wouldn't export myself, sell to them. So yeah, R1 million, that's what I would do. And just to those farmers out there, think big, but produce good quality and you'll get there.
Thank you so much, Elton. Duncan, that wraps it up for tonight. It was awesome.
It was an amazing chat. I think our listeners, everyone who tuned in, agrees with us that it was quite an informative chat. I wanted to thank actually, our speakers for joining us, Leona, Alton, Conce. Thank you so much, Tabili, for joining us in tonight's discussion. And also all our listeners, from literally around various corners of Africa. I saw farmers from Malawi, Nigeria, and Ethiopia all tuning in. So thank you so much for joining us on tonight's platform. For more daily inspirational, stories about the farmers and the agriculturalists who literally go above and beyond to feed South Africa. You can, of course, find out more by visiting www.foodformzansi.co.za. But also be sure to check out our sister publication, foodforafrica.com, where you can also find some inspiration and news from across the continent. Dawn, that's a wrap. It was an amazing discussion.
Definitely, Duncan. And to those of you who want to gather and grow with us again next week, same time, same place on Twitter Spaces. Thank you once again to our speakers. You guys were awesome. I knew it would be. So thank you so much. And thank you so much to our listeners. From me, Dawn, and the rest of our team, have a great week further and everything of the best with your farming ambitions, with your current farm, with diversifying and with making the best out of the situation and making this sector grow even bigger. So thank you so much and have a great evening.